The boy in the tree. One of the most tragic cases ever. Listen to the story.
Also es war grausam, einfach nur grausam.
Er hat aus dem Hals geblutet, er hat aus dem Oberkörper geblutet und er hat nach Hilfe gerufen.
Der Junge flüchtet vor seinem Vater, ruft, er will meine Mutter umbringen.
In the district of Windberg, in the northern part of Mönchengladbach, it is quiet, almost idyllic. The city center is not far away, and there are small local playgrounds and many green spaces. But in the spring of 2017, there is also something in Windberg that no one notices, not for several months. In a tree, a tall one, there is the body of a dead boy. He is only 17 years old when he dies, and over the course of weeks and months, his body remains in the treetop. Neither local residents nor people walking by notice anything. How could the life of Mark S. come to such an end? Mark grows up with his parents and 3 siblings in Mönchengladbach. The family lives in the district of Rheindahlen, in a multi-family house on Peterstraße. From the outside, Mark seems like a completely normal boy. He likes cartoons like SpongeBob and is a fan of Spider-Man, is interested in American cars, and loves climbing more than anything. But behind closed doors, things look very different. Unfortunately, there are some problems within the family. Mark's mother is partially paralyzed on one side after suffering a stroke and needs a lot of help in daily life. She receives this help from her son Mark. At that time, he is only 14 years old and already faces problems that would push even many adults to their limits. Mark's father is an alcoholic and tends to have violent outbursts. This makes the responsibility on the teenager's shoulders even heavier. The Youth Welfare Office is aware of the difficult circumstances within the family. One of Mark's older siblings had already been removed from the family in the mid-1990s. That sibling stayed in state care until adulthood and had no further contact with the parents or other siblings. In January 2014, Mark's parents still have serious problems with the children who are still living at home. In particular, Mark's little sister is rebellious. She is only 12 years old, but sometimes spends her free time with much older, even adult men. This causes the family great concern. That's why the parents contact a counseling center at the time to seek help. There, it is noticed that Mark's father actually has a restraining order concerning the family. The mother herself had filed a police report against her husband, which led to the order. However, she withdrew the report just one day later. When asked, both parents explained that everything was fine. For clarification, on January 12, 2014, Mark's mother went to the police. On that day, she reported for the first time that her husband had been hitting her repeatedly. She also said that he had once already killed another person. Because of these statements, a restraining order officially takes effect on January 13, 2014. This legal decision also forbids Mark's father from entering the shared apartment, for example. However, the mother withdraws from this order just one day later, and only a week after that, the couple already appears together again at the counseling center to ask for help with parenting. At this meeting, Mark's mother is said to have stated that she simply can't live without her husband. According to reports, the father still continued to be violent toward his wife. While drunk, he is said to have hit her repeatedly. Even beyond that, the father showed disturbing behavior. At night, he is said to have walked through the streets multiple times with a metal rod and damaged cars. Neighbors of the family reportedly even started a petition to force the family to move out. Again and again, Mark's father is said to have made racist comments and shouted Nazi slogans in the streets. One time, he allegedly threatened to hit a female neighbor in the face because her baby was crying too loudly and he felt disturbed by it. There were also repeated police interventions, but neighbors report that there were never any consequences. The officers would talk to Mark's father, then things would quiet down for a short time. But sooner or later, the noise and the disturbances would start again. After one of these police calls in January 2014, he is said to have shouted loudly that next time it wouldn't just be the police at the door. There would be a hearse. And sadly, Mark's father turned out to be right. Just a few days after the visit to the counseling center, the family's problems escalate even further. On the evening of January 23, 2014, the parents have another argument. According to media reports, it is once again about Mark's little sister. It is said that she had a boyfriend at the time who was 16 years old and had a migration background. Apparently, this last detail especially didn't sit well with Mark's father. He then blamed the mother for it and accused her of not being able to control their 12-year-old daughter. After the argument, the father goes to the nearby beverage store Dursty. There, he buys a few beers, which he drinks together with friends at the war cemetery in Rheindahlen. Afterwards, he makes his way back home again, but that evening he spends the night in the basement instead. There is an old Hollywood-style swing seat down there, where he sometimes sleeps when the arguments escalate, and he doesn't want to stay in the shared apartment. That night, he drinks a bottle of Genever and a bottle of wine. The next morning, Mark's mother has a doctor's appointment. The then 14-year-old Mark wants to go with her to the practice. In front of the house, the two are intercepted by the father, who stops them from going to the doctor. Mark's mother immediately asks her son to close the door again, but the 14-year-old tries to mediate first. He tries to de-escalate the situation and says that his father won't do anything and that it's okay for him to come back inside. But once inside the apartment, the confrontation turns physical. Mark's mother tells the father that she doesn't love him anymore. In response, she runs into the bedroom, but her husband follows her and then heads into the kitchen to grab a knife. And then, the unthinkable happens. He begins stabbing his wife, altogether 33 times. The only 14-year-old Mark pushes himself between them, trying to protect his mother. He manages to knock the knife out of his father's hand. But then Mark's father goes back into the kitchen and grabs a second knife. Now, he doesn't just attack his wife, he also turns on his son, who stands protectively in front of his mother. During this attack, Mark is stabbed twice. His injuries are so severe that his lung is punctured, and he loses a great amount of blood. Still, Mark manages to escape the apartment and call for help. He screams, "Help! My father's killing my mother!" And tragically, the 14-year-old boy is right. For Mark's mother, help comes too late. She dies at the age of 50, brutally stabbed to death by her own husband. Mark himself survives the attack by his father only just, thanks to an emergency surgery. The 14-year-old spends a long time in a hospital. Afterwards, he and his two younger siblings are placed in a children's home. Mark's father is arrested at the crime scene by police, and he is also seriously injured. During the arrest, police shoot him. After receiving medical treatment, he is placed in pre-trial detention, charged with manslaughter. On August 4, 2014, a trial begins, charging him with the murder of his wife, the attempted murder of his son Mark, as well as bodily harm and abuse of people under his care. During the investigation, police come across a case from the 1980s that had disappeared from the system. As it turns out, Mark's father had already committed a violent crime as a 20-year-old. Back then, he attacked his 17-year-old ex-girlfriend with a knife after she broke up with him. The girl was stabbed 10 times and survived only narrowly. However, the case had expired legally over time, and the records were destroyed. This meant that in the 2014 trial, Mark's father was not considered to have a criminal record. The prosecution demanded a life sentence. However, the criminal court classifies the father as a personality-disordered person who acted in a moment of emotional outburst. In addition, he is found to have had about 2.3% of alcohol in his blood at the time of the crime. Because the act was committed in the heat of the moment, and the offender was under the influence of alcohol, the charge of murder fails. Instead, Mark's father is convicted of manslaughter. As a result, he does not receive a life sentence, but a prison term of 12 years. The then 14-year-old Mark, as a survivor of the attack, is granted the right to receive 35,000 euros in compensation for pain and suffering. But Mark's father will never serve his full prison sentence. 1 year after the verdict in 2015, he dies in prison. Some sources mention suicide, while others say he died of natural causes. We don't know which is true, but what we do know is that Mark and his siblings were left behind as orphans. And life continues to place obstacles in front of Mark, more than most could ever bear. As a survivor of the attack by his father, Mark is deeply traumatized. He is diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. Such a disorder appears as a kind of delayed psychological reaction to an extremely distressing event. Typical symptoms of PTSD include flashbacks, anxiety, sleep disturbances, and nightmares. In addition, there are so-called avoidance symptoms, like a lack of energy and emotional numbness. It is hard to imagine what the then 14-year-old Mark must have gone through during this time. Although Mark is generally a quiet boy, it is said that he began to stand out at the children's home after his father's death. He would sometimes act out. Once during an argument, he reportedly grabbed a knife out of fear in order to protect himself. The teenager starts to withdraw more and more from others. At the same time, his little sister is moved to a different group, and so he loses regular contact with her as well. It is said that Mark is not yet able to start therapy, and he does not want to talk about his traumatic experiences. Again and again, he runs away from the children's home and spends the nights outside. He finds it very difficult to tolerate closed spaces, most likely as a result of his trauma. Closed doors or windows make him nervous, and he feels safer under the open sky. Most of the time, he wanders through the Windberg district of Mönchengladbach, where he sleeps on rooftops or in trees. Residents often see him walking through the neighborhood with his hood pulled low over his face. He doesn't seek contact with others and keeps to himself. In April 2015, Mark is admitted to a psychiatric facility for 2 nights. For a boy who suffers from panic attacks in confined spaces and fears losing control, this must have been an extremely difficult experience. While the Child Welfare Service would prefer to have Mark placed in psychiatric care permanently, the clinic disagrees. They say that Mark cannot be admitted for inpatient treatment because there is no immediate danger to himself or others. Furthermore, being admitted would mean an extreme loss of freedom, and that could actually be counterproductive, especially in Mark's case. So Mark is not taken in as a psychiatric inpatient. At some point, Mark is no longer allowed to enter the children's home. According to records from the city of Mönchengladbach, his placement there can no longer be continued. Unfortunately, I couldn't find out the exact reason for this decision. But from that point on, Mark lives on the streets. Now and then he receives some care from social workers and street outreach teams, but only occasionally. During this time, Mark turns to drugs. To get money for drugs and food, he commits a few thefts. He steals groceries, and once even breaks into a clothing factory. There, he steals clothes for his little sister. The two of them see each other only very rarely, but once he brings her a stolen handbag as a gift. In 2016, Mark spends a short time in juvenile detention because of his thefts. He is released under the condition that he must contact and stay in touch with the youth counseling service. But Mark doesn't follow through. By now, he is 17 years old and still living on the street. In December 2016 and January 2017, there are a total of 17 scheduled appointments for him at a psychiatric clinic. But Mark does not show up to a single one. From time to time, a few street workers are still in contact with him, but even those relationships eventually come to an end. The teenager blocks out any attempt at help. Just the thought of being in a closed space like a children's home triggers him. So he continues to live on the street, most often sleeping in trees. In January 2017, Mark is last seen by a support worker. That worker discovers one of Mark's hiding spots, on the flat roof of the local public health office. Mark spends the night there every now and then. When the staff at the health office see him, they bring him blankets or a warm jacket to protect him from the cold. Sometimes they give him a bit of food, too. But even toward the health office staff, Mark remains mostly silent. When the support worker discovers Mark's hideout on the roof, he calls the police. He likely hopes to finally confront Mark and convince him to accept help. The children's home where Mark used to live is only a few meters away from the health office. But when police and the support worker arrive, Mark manages to escape. He seems determined not to go back to any kind of youth welfare facility under any circumstances. On April 29, 2017, a man contacts the police in Mönchengladbach. While on a walk, he has noticed what looks like a large doll hanging in a tree. The old yew tree stands very close to the health office and also near the children's home. But when the police arrive, they discover it is not a doll lying in the tree. It is a mummified body. The corpse is about 4 meters up, high in the treetop. During the autopsy, the identity of the deceased is confirmed. As you might already have guessed, it is the body of 17-year-old Mark S. The exact cause of death can no longer be determined because the decomposition is already too advanced. It is believed that Mark likely died back in January 2017, either from freezing or from an overdose. The only thing that can be ruled out is the involvement of another person. For over 3 months, Mark must have remained there, high in the treetop of the old yew tree. Every day, people out walking, local residents, perhaps even people who knew him, passed under the branches of that tree. But no one seems to have looked up carefully enough to notice Mark in the tree. After the autopsy, Mark is buried in a shared grave together with his mother. Fates like Mark's may be rare, but that doesn't make them any less real. After his father killed his mother, and nearly killed him as well, Mark was left completely on his own. At an age far too young, with a burden far too heavy for any child to carry. I wish Mark's remaining family members, and those who knew him, strength and all the best moving forward. Maybe this can serve as a reminder for all of us to keep our eyes open to the people around us, and to notice what others might be going through. Sometimes a listening ear and a little trust can make a huge difference. Take good care of yourselves, and of one another. And with that, we've reached the end of today's somewhat different video. Feel free to write in the comments how you feel about videos like this. Yes, at its core, this is about a criminal case, but it's really the tragic story of the boy Mark that stands at the center. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts. Other than that, there's not much more to say, except that I'd really appreciate it if you'd leave a like, a comment, maybe even a subscription, and activate the bell. That way, the video gets more interaction shortly after it goes online, and that increases the chances that it will be recommended to others who haven't yet subscribed to Truthscape. Thanks in advance, and also thank you so much for watching. Here you can find the next chilling case. Until then, see you soon. Stay safe.